I thought everything would be forgotten. But my mother left me on the street with just one backpack. Only a year later did I find out why she betrayed me so harshly. It was a lie built on love. I was 16 when $300 went missing from my mother's dresser drawer. The money had been sitting there for weeks, tucked beneath her jewelry box like some kind of emergency fund. I'd seen it every time I walked past her open bedroom door, never thinking much about it until the day she discovered it was gone. The interrogation started immediately. My mother sat me down at our kitchen table, her face twisted with disappointment and rage. She demanded to know where the money was, her voice getting louder with each denial I gave her. I kept telling her I hadn't touched it, that I didn't even know it was missing until she started yelling. But she wouldn't listen. Her eyes had this look I'd never seen before, like she'd already decided I was guilty before asking the first question. My sister sat in the living room during all of this, curled up on the couch with her eyes glued to the floor. She didn't say a word, didn't even look up when my mother's voice echoed through our small apartment. I remember thinking it was weird how quiet she was being, considering she usually had something to say about everything. But I was too focused on defending myself to really think about it. The questioning went on for hours. My mother kept circling back to the same accusations, asking me what I needed the money for, whether I was hanging out with the wrong crowd, if I was doing something I shouldn't be doing. I felt like I was losing my mind, repeating the same answers over and over again. I hadn't taken anything. I didn't know where the money was. I couldn't explain what happened to it because I had nothing to do with its disappearance. 2 days later, she made her decision. I came home from school to find a backpack sitting by the front door, stuffed with some of my clothes and a few personal items. My mother stood in the hallway with her arms crossed, telling me I had until sunset to leave. She said she couldn't trust me anymore, that she wouldn't have a thief living under her roof. The words hit me like physical blows, each one making it harder to breathe. I tried to explain one more time that I hadn't stolen anything, but she cut me off before I could finish. She said she was disappointed in me, that she'd raised me better than this, and that maybe some time on my own would teach me the value of honesty. My sister was nowhere to be seen during this conversation. I heard her bedroom door close with a soft click just as my mother started talking. Walking out of that apartment with nothing but a backpack felt like stepping into a nightmare. I'd never imagined my own mother could throw me away so easily, could choose to believe I was capable of stealing from her without any real evidence. The streets felt different that night, darker and more dangerous than they'd ever seemed before. I was completely alone for the first time in my life. My best friend's family took me in without asking too many questions. They had a small house with barely enough room for their own kids, but they cleared out a corner of the basement and let me stay there. His parents were kind people who seemed to understand that sometimes teenagers needed help, even if they couldn't explain exactly why. I was grateful beyond words, but also humiliated that I needed their charity. Living in someone else's house taught me things about myself I'd never had to learn before. I became obsessed with being helpful, constantly cleaning and organizing, trying to prove I deserved the space they'd given me. I did dishes without being asked, took out trash, helped with yard work, anything to show I wasn't just taking advantage of their kindness. But underneath all that helpfulness was a constant anxiety that they might decide I wasn't worth the trouble. School became a strange refuge during those months. It was the one place where nothing had changed, where I could pretend my life was still normal. But concentrating on assignments was nearly impossible when I was spending most of my mental energy figuring out where I was going to sleep each night and whether I'd have enough money for lunch. My grades started slipping, which only added to the weight I was carrying. I tried reaching out to my mother multiple times during those first few months. I called the house phone until she changed the number, then tried again when I figured out the new one. I wrote letters that came back unopened. I even showed up at her workplace once, hoping she might be more willing to talk somewhere neutral, but she walked right past me like I didn't exist. Each rejection felt like losing her all over again. The worst part was not understanding why she'd been so quick to believe I was guilty. I'd never stolen anything in my life, never given her any reason to think I would. Sure, I wasn't a perfect kid, but I'd never done anything that would justify this level of distrust. The questions kept me awake at night, going through every interaction we'd had in the weeks before the money disappeared, looking for clues about what I might have done wrong. My sister's silence during all of this felt like another betrayal. We'd grown up sharing everything, talking through problems together, supporting each other when our mother went through her difficult phases. But when I needed her most, she'd vanished completely. She didn't answer when I called, didn't respond to messages, acted like I'd never existed. It was almost worse than my mother's anger because at least anger was a reaction. My sister's indifference felt like being erased. Update 1. 6 months after being kicked out, I was starting to build something that resembled a normal life. My friend's parents had officially taken me in as a foster placement, which meant I had some stability and even a small allowance for personal expenses. I'd found a part-time job at a local grocery store, working evenings and weekends to save money for the future I was trying to build without my family. The work was mind-numbing but therapeutic in its own way. Stocking shelves and helping customers gave me something concrete to focus on, tasks with clear beginnings and endings. My supervisor was a middle-aged woman who seemed to understand that some of her teenage employees were dealing with complicated situations at home. She never asked personal questions but always made sure I got the hours I needed. I'd started thinking about what came next, about how I was going to finish high school and maybe even go to college despite everything that had happened. The guidance counselor had told me about programs for students in situations like mine, scholarships, and support systems I'd never known existed. For the first time in months, I had hoped that my future might not be completely derailed by my mother's decision. But the anger was still there, simmering underneath the surface of my daily routine. I'd catch myself fantasizing about the day my mother would realize she'd made a mistake, imagining the conversation where she'd apologize and beg me to come home. Other times, I'd picture myself years in the future, successful and happy, while she regretted losing me. These daydreams were probably unhealthy, but they helped me get through the harder days. My relationship with my foster family was getting stronger, though I still struggled with feeling like an outsider. They included me in family activities and treated me like one of their own kids, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all temporary. I'd been thrown away once already. What was to stop it from happening again? This paranoia made it hard to fully relax or accept their kindness without constantly worrying about when it might end. The holidays were particularly brutal. Watching my foster family's traditions and celebrations reminded me of what I'd lost, of the Christmas mornings and birthday dinners I'd never share with my biological family again. I tried to be grateful for where I was, but the grief hit me in waves when I least expected it. Sometimes I'd find myself crying in the grocery store bathroom during my breaks, mourning not just my mother, but the sister who'd abandoned me too. I started having dreams about my old life, vivid memories of family dinners and movie nights that felt more real than my waking hours. In these dreams, everything was normal again, and the money had never gone missing. I'd wake up confused and heartbroken, having to remember all over again that those moments were in the past forever. The dreams made it harder to move forward because they kept pulling me back to what I'd lost. Update 2. Almost a year had passed when everything changed during one ordinary dinner with my foster family. My foster mother's sister had come to visit, bringing stories and gossip from around town like she always did. She was one of those people who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it, which usually made for entertaining dinner conversation. We were talking about nothing important when she mentioned running into my mother at the supermarket. My stomach dropped at the mention of her name, but I tried to keep eating and pretend it didn't affect me. Then my foster aunt said something that made me stop chewing completely. She casually mentioned how good it was that my mother hadn't let my sister waste all her money on drugs like some other parents might have. The words hung in the air for a moment before I could process them. I asked her to repeat what she'd said, my voice probably sounding strange. She looked confused by my reaction but explained that she'd heard about my sister's problems, about how my mother had been trying to help her get clean for months. The way she said it made it sound like common knowledge, like everyone in town knew something I didn't. I excused myself from the table and went to my room, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. Could my sister have been using drugs without me knowing? We lived in the same house, shared meals and conversations every day. How could I have missed something that significant? But as I thought back to those final months at home, details started clicking into place that I'd ignored at the time. My sister had been acting differently in the weeks before the money disappeared. She'd been more secretive, spending time away from home without explaining where she was going. Her mood swings had gotten worse, and she'd started sleeping at odd hours. I'd attributed it all to typical teenage behavior, but now I was seeing it through a different lens. The next day, I called my foster aunt and asked her directly what she knew about my sister. She seemed surprised by my questions and eventually told me the whole story as she understood it. My sister had been struggling with substance use for several months before I was kicked out. My mother had been trying to handle it quietly, hoping she could get her help without involving social services or law enforcement. According to my aunt, my sister had been taking money from around the house to buy drugs, and my mother suspected it but hadn't been able to prove it. The night the $300 went missing was apparently the final straw, But my mother still couldn't bring herself to turn in her own daughter. Instead, she'd chosen to blame me, knowing I'd deny it but hoping it would scare my sister straight. Learning this information felt like being hit by a truck. Everything I believed about what happened was wrong. My mother hadn't thrown me away because she thought I was a thief. She'd thrown me away to protect my sister from the consequences of her actions. I was the sacrifice she'd made to keep her other daughter out of trouble, the collateral damage in her desperate attempt to save someone she loved more. The betrayal felt different now, deeper and more personal than simple disbelief. My mother had known I was innocent, had chosen to destroy my life anyway because it was easier than dealing with the real problem. She'd looked me in the eye while accusing me of something she knew I hadn't done, had listened to me beg and plead my innocence while planning to throw me out regardless. Final update. I didn't contact my mother after learning the truth. Part of me wanted to call her and demand an explanation, to make her face what she'd done to me. But a bigger part of me realized that no explanation would change anything. She'd made her choice a year ago, and I'd spent all this time building a new life without her. Going back felt like moving backward when I'd worked so hard to move forward. My sister was arrested 3 months later for possession. The news spread through our small town quickly, and I heard about it from multiple sources before the day was over. Apparently, she'd been caught with enough substances to suggest she wasn't just using but possibly dealing too. Everything my aunt had told me was confirmed in the worst possible way. I felt a complicated mix of emotions when I heard about the arrest. There was satisfaction in being vindicated, and having proof that I'd been telling the truth all along. But there was also sadness for my sister, who'd clearly been struggling with problems I hadn't understood. And there was anger at my mother for letting things get this far, for choosing protection over truth until it was too late to matter. My mother tried to contact me after my sister's arrest. She called my foster family's house several times, leaving messages asking me to call her back. She sent letters that my foster parents gave me but didn't pressure me to read. Finally, she showed up at my workplace one evening, waiting by my car when my shift ended. Seeing her again after more than a year was surreal. She looked older, more tired than I remembered. She started talking immediately, trying to explain what had happened, why she'd made the choices she'd made. She told me she'd been scared and desperate, that she'd thought if she could keep my sister out of the system, she could save her. She said she'd never stopped loving me, that throwing me out had been the hardest thing she'd ever done. I listened to everything she said without interrupting, but I didn't feel the resolution I'd expected. Her explanations made sense from her perspective, but they didn't change what I'd been through. They didn't give me back the year I'd spent thinking my own mother believed I was a thief. They didn't undo the nights I'd cried myself to sleep wondering what I'd done wrong. When she finished talking, she asked if I would come home. She said my sister was getting help now, that things would be different, that we could be a family again. The offer hung between us in the parking lot while I tried to figure out how I felt about it. A year ago, I would have said yes immediately. I would have been grateful just to have my mother back in my life, regardless of the circumstances. But I wasn't the same person who'd been kicked out with a backpack full of clothes. I'd learned to take care of myself, to build relationships based on trust and honesty. I discovered that family wasn't just about blood relations, but about the people who showed up for you when things got difficult. My foster family had been more supportive in 1 year than my biological family had been in the final months we'd lived together. I told my mother I needed time to think about her offer, but deep down I already knew my answer. I'd built something good where I was, something stable and healthy. Going back felt like giving up the progress I'd made, like accepting that her love came with conditions I couldn't control. I deserved better than being someone's second choice or backup plan. The conversation with my mother was the last one we had. I never called her back or responded to her letters. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about choosing the life that felt right for me. I learned that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into, that love without trust isn't really love at all. My sister eventually got out of jail and went to rehabilitation. I heard updates through mutual acquaintances but didn't reach out to her either. Too much had happened for us to go back to being sisters like nothing had changed. She'd sat silently while I was blamed for her actions, had let me take the fall for something she'd done. That silence had been its own kind of betrayal. I graduated high school while living with my foster family and got accepted to college with the help of scholarships and financial aid. My foster parents came to both my graduation and my college orientation, proud and supportive in ways my biological family had never been. They'd given me something my mother couldn't, unconditional acceptance and the space to become who I was meant to be. Looking back now, I understand that my mother's actions came from a place of desperation and love for my sister. But I also understand that love can be destructive when it's not balanced with honesty and fairness. She'd chosen to protect one daughter by sacrificing the other, and that choice had consequences she couldn't undo. The experience taught me that family isn't automatic or guaranteed. It's something you build through trust, respect, and showing up for each other consistently. It's about choosing each other every day, not just when it's convenient or easy. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most will let you down in ways that change everything, and that's not your fault or your responsibility to fix. I don't regret the path my life took after being kicked out. Those difficult months taught me resilience and self-reliance I might never have developed otherwise. They showed me what I was capable of surviving and thriving through. Most importantly, they led me to people who chose to love and support me without conditions or ulterior motives. The family I have now isn't the one I was born into, but it's the one I needed. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, even when it doesn't look like what you expected. Sometimes being thrown away is actually being set free to find where you really belong. And sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is discovering that you're stronger than you ever imagined you could be.